Hi, everyone. My name is Abe Saffer. I am one of the federal lobbyists for the American Occupational Therapy Association, and I am extremely thrilled to be here tonight because I get to discuss education policy, my favorite thing to talk about, with potentially two of my favorite people in the world, let alone to talk education policy with. Um, and so I don't want to delay as any at all. So I want to do some introductions. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Myrna Mandowitz. Myrna has been an education lobbyist for over 30 years and currently consults for AOTA, the Council of Administrators of Special Education, and the American Music Therapy Association. She has served as president of the Committee for Education Funding, the largest and oldest national education funding coalition, and as a co-chair for the National Alliance of Specialized Instructional Support Personnel. Myrna taught little kids for 14 years and helped develop Virginia's original IDEA infants and toddler program. She holds a master's degree in early childhood education and a law degree. Next up, Dr. Leslie Jackson. She is the current chair and program director of the OTD program at Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa. In addition to that role, she was recently elected to the secretary of the AOTA Board of Directors. And my personal favorite moment of her career was when she served as the lead education policy staffer for AOTA, a position that is currently filled by someone far less qualified, myself. So I want to kick it off by asking both of you. First of all, thank you again for being here. Starting off, and we'll go with Leslie. The last time that IDEA was reauthorized or amended and changed by Congress, um, where were you? What were you doing? And what was your role?
Where was I? What was I doing? And what was my role? So the last time we reauthorized IDEA, which by the way was over 20, almost 25 years ago,
Mhm.
and it has not been reauthorized since. Um, so my job was what Abe is doing now. I was the primary AOTA lobbyist on Capitol Hill, managing and dealing with education policy issues. Um, Myrna was one of my buddies, and we did a lot of work together. Um, and so we were really wanting to be thoughtful and intentional about how do we very intentionally think about what is the role of occupational therapy in school settings, in early intervention programs with children all the way from birth through 21, which is the age population that the law serves in the various settings. How do we make sure that occupational therapy was clearly identified and articulated in the law, and for us to say this is how we support children uh, and their growth and development and learning, and how do we also support schools and teachers and administrators to do their roles better as well. That I think in a nutshell would be what my role was.
Sounds amazing. And Myrna.
Well, as Abe said, I've been lobbying in DC for over 30 years, and at the time, it's hard for me to remember back which clients I was serving when, but I know at the time, I was working with the School Social Work Association of America and the Learning Disabilities Association of America, and a couple of other clients as well. I'm a private consultant, rather than a full-time employee, and because of my role with LDA, working on parent issues, looking at things from the parent perspective, and from the school social work side, looking from the side of specialized instructional support personnel. And as Abe said, I was at the time one of the co-chairs. I believe it was still then called the National Alliance of Pupil Services Organizations, but has become specialized instructional support personnel. So my real focus was on looking at the law from the standpoint of how related services, or as we call them now, specialized instructional support services, were critical to serving students with disabilities and making sure that they got those services so that they could access the curriculum. I'll just say that that reauthorization, which happened in 2004 under George W. Bush, was particularly interesting in that that was kind of the turning point where we moved in special education law from looking at just access to the curriculum to really thinking more strategically and seriously about what the outcomes would be for kids with disabilities. Before that, it had really been just making sure they got in the door, got into the classroom, but then it really, with No Child Left Behind coming just a few years before the last IDEA reauthorization, that focus really shifted to looking at academic achievement, which was really new and unique for IDEA. So I hope that helps, Abe. I think that's kind of where I was situated at the time.
If I can add to that,
Yeah.
that's my recollection as well, Myrna. And in addition to that, we were also looking at how do we ensure that there was one educational system that addressed the needs of all of the children, and that it would not necessarily be that special education was going to be a place that we sent children to, but that the education system was responsible for educating all of its students, and IDEA would provide an infrastructure to provide an array of services and supports, including OT as a related service, so that we can be where the children were and support their learning wherever they were, even including within that that increased academic focus.
Yeah.
So Myrna brought up the No Child Left Behind, which is the general education law prior to what we have now, Every Student Succeeds Act. And it was passed, I think, in 2002. And IDEA's last reauthorization was 2004. And so I'm the thing that struck me about the times that IDEA has been reauthorized, and it's about, I think it's four times since it was first passed in 1975, was that two of those times Congress was controlled by Democrats, and two of those times Congress was controlled by Republicans, which including the last time when IDEA was reauthorized. And so given that, with No Child Left Behind came so closely to when IDEA was last reauthorized, like what was the policy debate like in terms of, you know, I mean, frankly, like things now are very different, but I'm curious, sort of like how partisan was education policy viewed back during the last reauthorization? And Myrna,
Oh,
we can start with you.
yeah, I'll jump in. It's been it's been 20 some years, so my memory's a little fuzzy, but I will say that Um, so at the time, John Boehner of Ohio was the chair of the House Education and Workforce Committee, and Senator Judd Gregg from New Hampshire was the chair of the
Mm,
Senate Education Committee, Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. Judd Gregg, I would say, and I think I'm remembering this well, was really sort of fancied himself as a disability advocate. And so, the debate, and John Boehner, became Speaker of the House. He was quite a character with his big cigar sitting there in the hearing room, even though it wasn't, he couldn't light it, but he always had it there as a prop. And I think that I'll just say generally that the tenor of Congress in those days that was 20 years ago, was very different than it is now. While there was, there definitely partisanship and all of that, there was a much more, and I'll use the sexist term, gentlemanly approach to legislation. So people were respectful, people listened to other people, they disagreed respectfully. So I think, what I would say is, and the other thing about it is IDEA in special education until really recently has always enjoyed bipartisan support. And, we've had disagreements and whatever, but there's been a recognition that disability doesn't just hit Democrats, it doesn't hit Republicans, it doesn't hit, it's not racial, it's not religious, what it hits every aspect and every aspect of the population. So, it was always quite bipartisan and people differed, but the goal was pretty much the same to make sure that kids with disabilities got the best education possible. And, I think that, again, just to reiterate that this notion, that the 2004 reauthorization was also the time that they threw in highly qualified, which was in No Child Left Behind, and they carried it over to IDEA. That was a bit of a contentious discussion about highly qualified teachers, special
Mm,
education teachers, and what the qualifications would be. Actually, we thought that they were pretty minimal, and it ended up being taken out of the law after a while. But I would say that it was a pretty respectful conversation, Abe.
that's
Linda,
amazing.
maybe you have
And
different recollections. I don't.
no, I agree. It was we don't want to give the impression that everybody agreed on everything because they
Right,
sure
right.
didn't, right?
Hmm.
And so, but it was even in the disagreement, there was still people were still open to talking. People were still open to hearing all of the different perspectives, and then coming to a decision about what they felt was best for their constituents as well as for the children that we were talking about. I do want to say one thing about No Child Left Behind because people know that name, but what we seem to forget is that No Child Left Behind was actually a reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary
Mm.
Education Act, ESEA, now known as ESSA. And so ESEA has an even longer legislative history than IDEA does. It was passed in the mid 60s. And it
Hmm.
was intended to provide funding in general education environments, particularly for children who were thought to have come from disadvantaged backgrounds. And it was intended to provide supports to level the playing field for those children. And I believe that during the time that there was the conversation around No Child Left Behind, there was still that mindset that Congress wanted to do something to make sure that all children were meeting relatively the same expectations and outcomes. It took the direction that it took because the leadership at the time thought that that was the best way to handle that. That all got modified when IDEA reauthorization came along. We adopted some of that language, but it also got modified. And additional supports were then added in 2004 to allow general education environments to also receive funding to support children. So that's where the response to intervention language came from. That's where the early intervening language came from. It was all part of an effort to ensure that all children had the supports that they needed to be successful.
And on top of that too, amen, Leslie, great summary that the other piece of NCLB that then crept into IDEA was the testing. I mean, that was really where we began to say that, we've got the state and district-wide tests. Kids with disabilities would be included in that testing. That became a new piece in the IEP, in the Individualized Education Program, saying that, you have to look at whether that child would be in the general ed testing or whether there would be alternate testing. But the idea, again, as Leslie said, that all kids, were now supposedly on a level playing field. And, we know that we know nothing is perfect, but that, that those testing requirements that were put into NCLB would also apply to kids with disabilities who are getting special education services. So, again, as I said, at the outset, that was sort of the piece about moving from that access to that academic achievement piece,
Hmm.
and that we were going to now measure that piece for kids with disabilities the way we were also measuring it for non-disabled kids.
So before we, I think, jump ahead, I do want to sort of mention something or call attention to something that you both were talking about. It's having studied education policy for my career, my absolute favorite thing to talk about is how the General Education Law, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and the Special Education Law, IDEA, since both's creation, every time one has been reauthorized, it's gotten closer to the other. And so I know, and Myrna, please, as usual, please correct me if I'm wrong on anything. But at one point, IDEA actually prohibited what was called incidental benefit, where you couldn't, if you were providing related services to a kid, they couldn't accidentally benefit a kid with general ed, and that was removed. And then early intervening services, as you mentioned, Leslie, was specifically designed to you could spend up to 15% of IDEA funds on students without IEPs to see if providing them services would help. And I think that all of these things sort of are coming to a place where you're trying to just educate kids in the most natural environment, which a term that I think a lot of people on this call know very well because it's a very occupational therapy term. And so I would love to get your thoughts on sort of where you feel like occupational therapy in schools was pre 2004 reauthorization versus where we are, today, knowing obviously there's still work to be done, but some of the advances or maybe not. Wait, when we've gone backwards on that.
Um, I strongly believe that the 2004 reauthorization actually opened the door for occupational therapy practitioners in schools, in early intervention programs across that education spectrum. I believe it opened the door for us to really show who we are and what the benefit is, or what the benefit could be for children that we worked with, children and their families, children and teachers, children in school districts, the school administrators, and all of that. Uh, and in that vein, the department, at that time, in its wonderful wisdom, also funded these partnership projects that
Mm,
allowed all of the stakeholder groups, the parents, the administrators, the related services personnel, the teachers, and everybody who touched the child could come together and work together and learn about each other and come to understand what the expertise of these different groups are, how we work together, how we can support one another. And ALTA was all up in that. What we call the IDEA partnership projects. Many of you will recall that. Um, because there was a recognition that this was an opportunity, this was a moment in the education of all children, but particularly for children with disabilities. How do we do this right? How do we do this well? And so it opened the door for OTs to work, to be in general education environments. It opened the door for OTs to be on those teams where they were thinking about how do we support children before they are referred before they're referred for special education. How do we support kids after they're referred to special education? And I was pleased to see the progress that was being made because the association, as you know, put a great deal of effort and invested heavily in making sure that our members could do this and could do this well. Um, I have to be honest and say, I've been away from it for a while. And so I don't have the same sense of where we are in terms of the work that is going on in the field. I will admit, I and confess, I am still hearing questions or some of the same concerns coming up that we dealt with in the 90s and the early 2000s. I've been
hmm
an OT for a very long time. I'm still hearing some of the same questions that people were asking when I became an OT. And so I don't know if that means that we're going backwards, but we still have the same opportunity. We need our practitioners to understand clearly what their roles are, what they can do, how do they best support children in these environments, even in the midst of, and I know they're dealing with high caseloads, and I know there are lots of questions around workload. I know that there are concerns about, about funding. But there is still that opportunity there for us to show and demonstrate who we are and why we matter. And especially today, for us to demonstrate why we still matter in those environments and with those children. And so that's a long-winded answer to your question. I feel very passionate about this. I know what we're capable of doing, and I have every confidence that we can do this work.
And
Can I jump in for a second?
yes,
Because
please go ahead.
I have to give Abe a pat on the back. So, he
Well,
followed
then
in
please, by
my
all means.
footsteps, and I just want to tell all of you in the audience that you have an excellent person representing occupational therapy here in Washington. And I think, I'll also say that Abe is currently serving and has been for a while now as one of the co-chairs of this coalition that he mentioned that I served actually for 12 years in the National Alliance of Specialized Instructional Support Personnel. And, just to kind of follow on Leslie was saying, I think the real mission of that coalition that includes the OTs, PTs, SLPs, the school mental health folks, the school nurses, the broad array of people that surround kids with disabilities, and hopefully have the opportunity to work with kids who aren't disabled as well, given the gifts and talents you all have in the audience to be able to help kids who they're not necessarily labeled disabled, but they can benefit from occupational therapy. That coalition here in DC, this is how we operate in DC by coalition, brings all those national organizations together representing all those specialized instructional support personnel and go to Capitol Hill and go to the Department of Education, who, by the way, doesn't really understand all of this too well either, to really explain that, these services are critical to help kids do well in school, to access instruction, to be able to be academically successful. So I'm just saying that Abe is carrying that message with great expertise, but also how critically important the coalition idea is that that OT is boosted by being able to work with its partners in the other specialized instructional supports services to really give the message that these are distinct services. They each bring something clear to the table. They're not one big blob called specialized instructional support personnel, that each one of those professions has a really important role to play in the success of kids in school. So I think that's a really important message.
Yeah, no, well said. And I 2 points. One, Leslie mentioned the IDEA partnership as being a fantastic tool and effort, and it was. And I believe it was Leslie's work doing that, organizing it, and getting everyone together, just showing that having an OT at the table and being able to sort of organize it. And it's something that lives on today. I forget what its current iteration is called, but it's something that still exists. It's one of the technical assistance centers that the department has. So it was absolutely fantastic. And then the other thing is that last year AOTA held its first ever survey of school-based OTs and OTAs specifically. And one of the questions I asked was, what percentage of your time do you spend working with kids with IEPs? And one of the little sort of nuggets that I love is that if you look at practitioners who've worked more than 16 years in schools, they're about 70% of the time working with kiddos with IEPs. Under 5 years, it's about 50%. So it's just showing that like we're starting to make that move to more of a in natural environment, inclusive, integrated service delivery, which I love and is fantastic. Um, so I want to move to the present, unfortunately, and start talking about sort of where we are now, because the last time Congress actually reauthorized the IDEA, it did something that I don't know another example of this is that it permanently authorized, meaning Congress would never have to go back to it. It permanently authorized Part B, while most other laws say 5 or 10 years. And so they would never have to touch it again if they didn't want to. So I have two questions for you both. Simple, but I'm sure not. Um, One, do you think that it'll be reauthorized anytime soon? And let's use the geological soon of within 10, 15 years. But if you think it'll be reauthorized soon. And then second is, do you think it needs to be? Regardless of partisanship and what's going on right now, should IDEA be reauthorized?
I'm happy to jump in.
Yeah.
Number one, I see no possibility that IDEA will be reauthorized soon. All the federal education laws, ESSA, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or as Every Student Succeeds Act, the Higher Education Act, IDEA are all well overdue for reauthorization. And I really don't see that happening. I'd say that the community of advocates in the disability arena do not want IDEA reauthorized under the uh, current climate in Washington, that we are very concerned about the law being opened up, and what might be done, to change the law in ways that would not be helpful to the education of kids with disabilities. Um, I, and just to correct you, Abe, the law forever, Part B, the K-12 program was permanently authorized when, I believe I'm right, when it was first passed in
Oh,
1975.
Yes, it was.
That the Part C program, the infant and toddler program, is not permanently authorized. Part D, which are all the personnel prep, the parent training centers, not permanently authorized. But that state grant K-12 program is permanently authorized. Should it be reauthorized? Honestly, there's no law that's perfect. So there's always something, there are always concerns that can be addressed. But I do think it has to be done in a climate more like what Leslie and I described earlier on, when there's a more respectful way of, without being, trying to say this in the most politically correct way possible, having a Congress that really respects each other and has real honest debate about the issues. And so
Yes.
that really, unfortunately, is not where we're sitting at the current moment. So until that happens again, when we have more bipartisanship, I would be very concerned about seeing this law opened up for reauthorization.
hmm.
I would completely 100% agree with that. While the parts that Myrna talked about, what's permanently authorized, what's not permanently reauthorized, as long as Congress provides funding, that continues those parts, right?
Right.
So as long as they don't mess with the money, we're good. However, as we are seeing, um, that's going to be an area that Abe is going to fall to you and Heather and Ryan and others at AOTA to kind of monitor what's happening on the budget side. I do want to make sure I mention, however, while we are talking about the federal law, all of the work actually trickles down to the state. So we can't just we can't just look at what's happening federally. We also need to pay attention to what each of the state departments of education are doing relative to educating children in those states, including kids with disabilities. We have seen in the past year efforts to I won't use this word. I'm going to say it, but I'm not going to use it. Gut Section 504 protections. We have seen efforts to, um, in my own state, change the existing structure for um, how IDEA related services were being provided across the state for school districts. And I'm sure there are other states are seeing something similar. So we also have to be mindful of what's happening in each of the various states and what is that philosophy, what is that mindset about what people believe about educating all children, including those with disabilities, and how are they talking about the role of occupational therapy in those instances. And
Hmm.
so we can't take our eye off the ball, but we've got multiple balls that we got to pay attention to.
Absolutely. And I'll take a minute to make a pitch. So there's, I think, seven, don't quote me, six or seven, maybe eight states where an occupational therapist works at the State Department of Education. And I get to join their meetings regularly, and they're great sounding boards. And so, for any OT or OTA out there that is thinking about it, your State Department of Education needs you, because I can tell you they're doing some things that are absolutely amazing. Some of the examples that I share with Congress the most come from the states where there's OTs at the state level. Um, so yeah, absolutely. Um, so let's assume for a second that there is suddenly a stronger desire to reauthorize IDEA. Um, and we've all agreed that's going to be a process, a semi-regular process. Given the current environment, given the history, what are the questions that we need to be asking ourselves as a profession? And I like to include myself in that group just to be cool. But what questions do we need to be asking while we prep for the next reauthorization? And Leslie, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. Um, I think one of the first questions, and it's not just limited to those of us who work in schools and early intervention programs, but I think as a profession, we need to be able to clearly articulate what is occupational therapy. What is occupational therapy? What does it look like? Um, what does it consist of? How do you provide it? Um, when do you provide it? When back in the day, we used to talk about when is the expertise of occupational therapy needed? And I think that's still a relevant question. So we need to be really clear, what is OT? What does it look like? And then we can then here's what it looks like in school environments. Here's what it looks like in an early intervention program. Here's what it looks like in rehab. Here's what it looks like in acute care. Because I suspect whenever it comes back up, there's going to be some more conversation about this thing called related services. Who are these people and what do they
Mhm.
provide? What supports do they offer? So we need to be able to say, this is who we are. This is how we are distinct from others, but this is also how we support others in performing their everyday occupations. And this is why we matter, and this is why we value. This is what we bring to the table. So that's the first. That's the first thing. I think we also need to be thinking about how are our people being trained to go into these environments, so that they can clearly articulate. Here's what I'm doing and why, and that we are addressing the full scope of occupational therapy practice. Not, I'm sorry, my personal pet peeve, we don't just do handwriting, people. We provide occupational therapy. Um, And that's what we should be talking about. Here's how occupational therapy helps children be successful in school. The breadth of school and education related activities, and we can use occupations. Um, and so that's what we need to be talking about. Some of this is going to have to happen across the profession, and
Hmm.
some of it is going to be very specific to particular areas of practice and particular populations.
And well, I'm not an OT. I have to say that up. Abe and I are not OTs, but we act like them when we have to, right? That I will just say I've been working with AOTA for a number of years now, and I just think it's fantastic, Leslie. You can really say it. It's amazing. I was watching some of the comments popping up here. Amen to you. What I would say is that everything Leslie said is absolutely correct, but one thing I want to say that has been a pet peeve of mine as an education lobbyist, as an educator for my entire career since 1974, I'm older than I look, I think, that the bottom line is that educators and specialized instructional support personnel, including OTs, do not advocate for themselves loudly enough. They believe you believe, I believed as a teacher, although I really didn't believe this because I've always had a loud mouth, that advocating for yourself is self-serving. Wrong, wrong, wrong. We want and we need more OTs in schools. We need one in every school, not one who's traveling between 4 or 5 schools. So learning to be a self-advocate is critically important. As a matter of fact, that's what we do in schools. We try to teach kids to self-advocate, but the professionals themselves think it's self-serving. So we need to get rid of that mindset so that you can go forward. It's really critical. The other thing that I would just mention is, yeah, advocating is an educational opportunity for all. I like that. That we are in an age of shortages. I don't have to tell you all this. I mean, there are shortages of OTs, there are shortages in every profession in education that touch kids. And that means even more that you have to be an advocate. You have to explain to the principals, to the local superintendents, to the chief state school officers, to policymakers, to everyone why these professionals are critically important and why the money is critically important to help school districts pay for these people to be in schools and helping kids. It's not enough just to say, oh, we can't find an OT in a rural area. Well, there's got to be a way to do it. There's got
Hmm.
to be a way to do it, but policymakers need to understand the importance of these professions if we really are sincere about having well-educated kids, and not just academics, but also socially and emotionally healthy kids. So I would say, we really need to
Yes.
work on that shortage piece as well.
I,
And if I can
oh,
just add,
please.
I'm sorry, Abe, and if I can just
No.
add to what Myrna said about the self-advocacy. I'm in OT education, and so one of the things that we talk to our students about all the time is advocacy, advocating on behalf of our patients and our clients. We also have to advocate on our own behalf. We have to show up and demonstrate what we do. It is in those everyday interacting actions that people learn about what occupational therapy is. It is in those everyday conversations that you have with teachers and parents and educators that they learn about who we are and what is our value in that environment with that population. And so you don't have to do what Myrna and what I used to do and what Myrna still does, right? It's not about showing up with the policymakers always. It is about what is it that you do when you show up at work every day, because that's where the rubber meets the road. But that is also where you are able to get other people to support you and be on your side. And they're going to be
Mhm.
the ones who will want to also have those conversations that Myrna was just talking about. They're going to be the ones to say to the principal, oh no, I need occupational therapy for my child, and this is why. Oh no, I think we need to hire some more occupational therapy practitioners, and this is why, right? And so that way, we're not carrying the load by ourselves. We have partners who have skin in the game because we have demonstrated why what we have to offer is important.
Yes, yes. Everything you said, I, I've been saying for years, and I'm so glad to hear it come out of other people's mouths. I'll tell a quick story that I believe at bragging about what you do as occupational therapy practitioners isn't self-promoting. It's the opposite. It is giving something to someone. They might not know they need OT. Everyone in my family has pretty much gotten OT, including myself. It just happened to be in a more informal setting from my boss. Um, but the thing is that my nephew's ADD, I tried to get him OT for a while, and finally my sister-in-law like relented. And a few months later, I was visiting for Christmas and asked, how does he like OT? And my sister-in-law said he hates it. He absolutely hates it, and we don't understand the point of it. I go, why? He goes, well, all he's doing is just folding towels for an hour a week. And then he's graduated to folding pieces of paper. And without stopping, I said, is he having as many explosive episodes of anger and frustration? And she stopped dead and said, no. And I go, that's self-regulation work. And she said, why didn't the OT tell me that? And I go, because they're great at a lot of things, but not that. And so being able to talk about OT in a way that other people understand is something that is going to not just show your value, but also help other people who are like, oh, I could actually benefit, or my father or mother, whatever, could benefit, or child. So, if you've spoken to me at all, you know my motto is for OTs and OTAs, please brag about what you do because it makes my job easier, but it also makes the world a better place. So I want to get to some of the questions. There's the elephant in the room that we had a couple people ask questions about. So recently, it was, I can't believe it, 2 days ago, feels like a lifetime, that some of that the Department of Education announced what they call uh, interagency agreements, that they've essentially moved the management and administration of ESSA, the General Education Law, to the Department of Labor. And so I always want to I want to try to let folks know sort of like how it's going to affect their day to day, but also what is that going to do to the education system as a whole. So I guess Myrna, I know that you've been deep in this as I have. So like, what I guess what would your top two or three things that you think are going to be the biggest impact of ESSA moving to labor be?
Well, number one, I've been saying now, as Abe says, it feels like it's been 2 years, but it's only been 2 days that we've been talking about this, that I'm not sure what the Department of Labor knows about K-12 education. I was a kindergarten teacher, and I really don't think there's any expertise at the Department of Labor around kindergarten, or third grade or fourth grade, or maybe even 12th grade. I think that the problems are going to be that it's a whole new system that has to be created. They have couched this in terms of streamlining, but just as an example, the money is going to, the way we understand it right now, remain at the Department of Education. It will be sent to the Labor Department, which will then send it to the state departments of education, which will then send it down to the districts. So not only is it not streamlining, but it's added a whole layer of bureaucracy in there by making it have to flow from one agency to another at the federal level before it gets down to the state level. I think the big issue is what staff will be running these programs, what expertise do they have? But the most important things for me, actually, I'll just say, is number one, it does not, a country that does not have a ministry or a department of education shows that they do not value education, as far as I'm concerned. Also, Abe has said this really articulately, and I believe this is 100% true, that we have worked in special education to coordinate with elementary and secondary, with career and technical education, with bilingual education, with all of those other programs. A lot of people seem to think that a student with a disability who's eligible for IDEA only gets services from IDEA. IDEA is just the supports and services that help them in general education. They might be a child who's an English learner. They might be a child, as I said, who's looking at career tech ed or all these other programs. And when you disperse these programs among 5 or 6 different agencies, you lose all that coordination, all that comprehensive look at education. It also means that a State Department of Education, which is only used to working with the U.S. Department of Education, has no connection to the Treasury Department or the Labor Department or Health and Human Services. Now, in the streamlined system, instead of working with one agency, is going to have to work with 5 and try and coordinate it at the state level. The other piece of it is state departments of education over the last few years have basically been decimated. Their staff capacity is much lower than it was a few years ago. So how they will accomplish this is just we don't know the answers to the questions right now. This is only 2 days old, but
Hmm.
I guess I'm wondering in my own mind, being a cynic, if this was thought out before it was implemented, because if it was, then they haven't explained yet to us or didn't explain up front how this new system is going to play out. So I think it's
Hmm.
just fraught with a lot of problems. But the bottom line is, as far as I'm concerned, I don't know who at the Department of Labor knows about K-12 education.
Yeah.
And if I can add to that, to Myrna's point about the thoughtfulness of this, what is missing in all of this is a conversation about what is the policy. What is the policy objective here? Um, what is this saying about what we as a country believe about education? What are we saying about, what does this say about us as a country, about what we believe about ensuring that we have a well-educated populace who can leave school and go into and be contributing members of society? There is no conversation happening about that. We just get these pronouncements. Okay, now we're going to move this and now we're going to move that. And there's nothing that says this is how one is connected to the other, and there's nothing about how one is going to support and help us achieve our goals and our outcomes better, because we don't know what our goals and our outcomes are.
Yeah.
And one other thing I would add, well, amen, Leslie, that I've said, that education isn't just about training. I mean, that's the end of it. That's later on and at the end of education. It is
Hmm.
about having well-rounded kids and people who are curious, intelligent, really think, people who think also about the social and emotional piece. And Leslie and I are both early childhood people, so we think about that a lot as well. But one other thing I would say is the data collection piece. This is a big thing. It's mandated in IDEA. there's a whole section under IDEA about data collection, but also we do data collection in Title I and all the other programs that's unclear too. Those data that are collected inform best practice, inform how we're going to develop our policies and whatever. So all of that, again, it's very unclear just saying we're going to move the program to another agency. Will that data collection remain in the Department of Education? Will it go to labor? How will all of that fit together? It's like a puzzle with pieces now that are all over here, and we don't know how to put the puzzle back together quite yet, if
Yeah.
if we can.
No, I could not agree more. And I Yes, and I will say that my day was today and yesterday was dominated with this, and so I'm always proud when I get to debut new articles or resources. And Myrna, you're going to love this one, but I'm going to put this in the chat. It is 6 reasons why we should not dismantle the Department of Education. So we have one that's 8 reasons why IDEA should stay at Ed, and this one is why should the Department of Education stay unified, intact. So let's see what other trying to so first of all, I can tell you right now we're not going to be able to answer all the questions, but what we'll do is we'll try to put like an FAQ together in response to this so that um folks can get some answers into some of these things, because I will tell you these questions are remarkable. Like some of them are very like, I want to get active, what do I do, and all that. So I love it. So I want to I since it's a well-known secret, or a well poorly kept secret, that school-based OTs and OTAs are my favorite. I want to address a student question who said, "What advice do you have to OTs working in education or interested students to help protect IDEA and accessible education for all students during the time when massive education changes are occurring at the federal level?" I'm gonna be last, but I would love to weigh in. But Myrna, I'd love to hear what should what would you like as a paid advocate, how would you want our folks to really be engaging to try to make sure that we can continue to keep things accessible, and as integrated as possible? I'm putting you on the spot here wildly.
That is a very big question. I think we've kind of talked around that already about, the whole notion of advocacy and what advocacy looks like. Um, I think the biggest thing I would say, from my wearing my lobbyist hat, is when the organization reaches out to each of you to contact your members of Congress, to participate, to provide stories critically important. Those are really the good ways to help a coordinated advocacy effort. People on the Hill, they like to hear from Abe, they like to hear from me, but they really like to hear from their constituents. And so if you're an OT or you're studying to be an OT, you've got a kid you can point to and say, IDEA or education dollars or whatever are helping this kid be successful, or we need more money. We need more OTs in our school district because we're stretched too thin to be able to do the work we know that needs to be done. So those are the kinds of things I would think of off the top of my head. I'm not sure if that's the answer, but I'm kind of like, I, that's
No,
it.
I completely get it. I think just advocating in general, my sort of response will be membership.
Well,
The my cliche is that AOTA doesn't represent. If we doubled our membership, we still would not represent half of the profession, but there'd be two of me, and there'd be two of my boss, and two of Ryan. And frankly, the more people we have, the more that we can accomplish. And I tell people I get the most burnt out at my job is when I have to watch that ball go by, when I can't take a swing at a pitch down the middle.
Yes.
The more you learn about occupational therapy, the more you're like, I can see all the different places that it can help. And I mean, I don't know if maybe I'm an outlier. I don't think I am, but all I want to do is just like capitalize on all of those ways and start
Mhm,
talking about it. So,
mhm.
I would say as a student, just show your work, brag as much as you can, to not just clients and administrators, but people in the grocery line, everywhere
Mhm.
you can, just talking about it.
The other thing I will add to that is for the students, make sure you get a field work rotation in a school environment or in an early intervention program. That way, you also get some experience in that environment. You get some firsthand knowledge about being in that environment, and then you can also help support your fieldwork educator. You can help support the teachers you're working with. You can help support the families you're going to be working with. Another way to advocate on behalf of the profession and of yourself. And for all of you, keep talking about what you do. I used to say all the time, it's called being a broken record. For some reason, we seem to think we only have to tell people one time and everybody's going to know what we do. That's not how this works. You just have to keep talking about it and keep talking about it and keep talking about it and keep talking about it until people come to understand. And don't just talk about it, show them what you do because that is the evidence. That by itself will be what gets people on your side because they see that you know what you're doing. They see that you care about these kids and they see that you are willing to roll up your sleeves and do the work that needs to be done. So that's what we need to do.
Abe, can I
Fantastic.
jump in for just a minute too on, this
Yeah.
moving programs from the U.S. Department? Maybe everybody isn't familiar with this yet, that maybe everyone hasn't read the news, but they really are moving most of the programs out of the Department of Ed. They did this week. They have not yet moved the Office of Special Education Programs, which was the one we were most concerned about. But we are quite sure, frankly, that is going to happen. But I feel like it was delayed because of strong advocacy from the disability community. The intention is to move it to the Department of Health and Human Services. And the reason I bring this up is because what Leslie just said about being an OT in the school setting versus being an OT in a medical setting, that if they move, one of my biggest concerns among many is if special education goes from education to health and human services, then suddenly they think that that's not an education department. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is an education law, but HHS, Health and Human Services, is exactly what it sounds like. Are they, if they move our special education programs to HHS, going to look at OTs in a very different way and think, oh, well, now OTs are going to be operating in schools in a medical model rather than the way they operate now to support students to be successful in education. So I'm very, very concerned about the specialized instructional support services and what that would look like moving to an agency that focuses on a medical model rather than an educational model.
So it is almost 8:30.
Sorry.
So I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative to have the last word, which I don't take lightly because of the two people that I am speaking to. But one of the questions was that, or a couple of people asked about this issue related to the student loan changes of professional versus graduate. And I will say that AOTA has been monitoring this and working on this for months already. That we've been on this, we think it's a problem, and that we have an article coming out soon and some other resources. But if you're really concerned about it and want to weigh in, go to aota.org/take action, and there's an action alert on there that you can take right now, and it'll be it's something that we're ongoing. We've organized a huge coalition of organizations to address this. And then my final note is that for those of you who know me, for those of you who probably for the practitioners that have watched me present tonight, I don't think it'll come as a huge shock that I am ADHD. I was diagnosed when I was 5 years old, which I'm going to age myself. It was prior to it being called the IDEA. It was the Education for All Handicapped Children. I had an IEP my entire time from K through 12. Thank God my parents are both public school teachers. Um, I would not be here today if it wasn't for the IDEA, if it wasn't for people like Myrna and Leslie fighting to make sure that I was getting the accommodations that I need, that I was getting the modifications that I need, and that I was getting access to all of the services and supports that I needed. And so uh, I will say that from tonight, this has been one of my favorite things I think I've ever done at AOTA. And the thing I'm most proudest of is staying regulated, given how excited I was about this event and not just absolutely going crazy. So this is recorded. We're gonna do some follow up on other questions. If you have any other questions related to school based or anything, I'm putting my chat or my email in the chat. Please follow up. But for right now, um, November 29th, that's a Sunday after Thanksgiving. So when you're being thankful for everything, you can include the official 50th anniversary of IDEA, and just a couple weeks later is the 10th anniversary of the Every Student Succeeds Act. So let's just keep on celebrating, keep the party going. Anyway, just cannot thank you both enough for this. This was amazing, and I appreciate everyone for joining us. And hopefully, we will see you very soon. Have a great night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.